6 years together, wedding in 2 days. Then I saw the bank notification at midnight. At 37, I believed I understood the architecture of trust. My engineering career had taught me that structures either hold or they collapse, and for 6 years, Rebecca and I had built something I thought was unshakable. Our daughter Charlotte was thriving in middle school. We just closed on a house in the suburbs of Portland, and the wedding was exactly 48 hours away. I was sitting at our kitchen table at 11:30 p.m., addressing the final batch of invitations when my phone buzzed with the kind of alert that changes everything. Chase Bank notification. $850 charge at the Heathman Hotel. Same city, same night. The woman I was about to marry had told me 3 hours earlier that she was driving to Salem to help her sister with wedding preparations. Have you ever felt the exact moment when your reality shifts beneath your feet? When everything you believe transforms into something you no longer recognize? I stared at that notification for what felt like eternity, but was probably 30 seconds. My logical mind scrambled for innocent explanations. Maybe she'd stopped for gas near the hotel. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the bank had the location wrong. But engineers are trained to test hypotheses, not to ignore data, and the data was screaming. I opened our shared location app with trembling fingers. Her phone showed offline. For the past 4 hours, she'd mentioned something about driving through areas with poor cell coverage, another detail that had seemed thoughtful at the time, but now felt calculated. My hands moved without conscious direction, opening our banking app, scrolling through recent transactions. There it was again, the Heathman Hotel, but not just tonight, 2 weeks ago. Same amount. Same merchant code. The kitchen suddenly felt suffocating. The wedding invitations scattered across the table looked like evidence of my own stupidity. How long had I been living in a story she'd written for me while living a completely different truth? I need you to understand something about betrayal. It doesn't arrive like a slap or a shout. It seeps in like carbon monoxide, odorless and invisible until you're already poisoned. For months, maybe longer, I'd been breathing in lies so skillfully crafted that I'd mistaken them for air. The drive to downtown Portland took 23 minutes through empty streets. The city at midnight looks honest in a way it never does during daylight hours. No pretense, no performance, just concrete and glass and the occasional homeless encampment that reminds you how quickly life can unravel. I parked across from the Heathman and sat in my Honda Civic, watching the lobby through floor-to-ceiling windows. The hotel exuded the kind of understated luxury that appealed to people who wanted to feel sophisticated without being flashy. Exactly Rebecca's style. She'd always had taste that exceeded our budget, and I'd always found ways to stretch our finances to accommodate her desires. Looking back, I realized how many of those desires had probably included him. Marcus. I'd seen his name in her phone contacts, filed under M Work. She'd mentioned him occasionally over the past year. A colleague from her marketing firm who'd transferred from the Seattle office. Divorced. Good-looking in that effortless way that made married women reconsider their choices. I'd met him exactly once at her company's holiday party. He'd shaken my hand with a kind of firm grip that feels like a challenge, looked me directly in the eye, and complimented my tie. Classic behavior from a man who was already planning to take what belonged to me. I sat in my car for another 15 minutes, watching late-night hotel traffic. A few business travelers. A couple who looked like they were having an affair of their own. The valet parking attendant who kept checking his phone between cars. Normal people living normal lives while mine imploded in slow motion. Then I saw them. Rebecca emerged from the hotel's main entrance at 12:47 a.m., and the sight of her literally stole my breath. She wore the black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, the one she'd claimed was too fancy for casual dinners but apparently perfect for midnight rendezvous. Her hair was slightly mussed, her lipstick gone, and she moved with the loose, satisfied posture of someone who'd just had her needs thoroughly met. Marcus followed 30 seconds behind, maintaining just enough distance to seem coincidental to anyone who might be watching. But I was watching, I was recording, and I was documenting every detail with the methodical precision of someone who'd finally stopped being a victim and started being an investigator. He walked her to a waiting Uber, kissed her cheek with casual intimacy, and watched the car pull away before retrieving his own vehicle from the valet. A silver BMW sedan that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. As he drove past my position, I caught a clear view of his profile, and for just a moment, our eyes met through the windshield. He didn't recognize me, but I saw something in his expression that made my blood freeze. Satisfaction. Ownership. The look of a man who believed he'd won something valuable. The Uber carrying Rebecca headed east toward our neighborhood, while I sat paralyzed by the magnitude of what I'd witnessed. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a spontaneous mistake. This was practiced, coordinated, a routine they'd perfected while I'd been planning our future. I drove home in a daze, arriving 10 minutes before Rebecca's Uber pulled into our driveway. I pretended to be asleep when she slipped into bed, but I could smell him on her skin. His cologne mixed with the scent of hotel soap and something else I didn't want to identify. She settled beside me with the careful movements of someone trying not to wake a sleeping partner, and I lay there listening to her breathe, wondering how many other nights I'd shared a bed with lies. The next morning brought the kind of crystalline clarity that only comes after devastating revelation. While Rebecca showered, claiming she needed to wash off the dust from the road trip that had never happened, I systematically documented everything I discovered. Screenshots of the bank transactions, photos of the hotel receipt from our shared email account that showed a couple's spa package, call logs from our phone bill that revealed dozens of late-night conversations with Marcus over the past 3 months. But evidence without strategy is just heartbreak with documentation. I needed more than proof of her betrayal. I needed justice that would be witnessed, understood, and impossible to rewrite. Rebecca emerged from the bathroom wrapped in my favorite towel, humming softly while she applied makeup with unusual care. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, kissing my forehead with lips that had been kissing another man 12 hours earlier. "I'm so excited for tomorrow. Are you ready to become my husband?" The audacity was breathtaking. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of a woman who could compartmentalize her deception so completely that she could ask me about our wedding while the scent of her lover's cologne still lingered in her hair. But I smiled and kissed her back because predators aren't the only ones who can wear masks. "I can't wait," I told her, and for the first time in months, I meant it. The wedding rehearsal was scheduled for 6 p.m. at the Laurelhurst Community Center, the same venue where we'd hold the reception. Rebecca had chosen it because it was affordable and charming, but I now realized it was also perfectly suited for public revelation. One large room, multiple exits, and acoustic design that would carry every word to every corner. I spent the day making phone calls with surgical precision. First, Rebecca's sister Jennifer in Salem, who confirmed she hadn't seen Rebecca in over a month and had no knowledge of any wedding preparation help. The lie was so casual, so automatic, that I wondered how many others I'd swallowed without question. Next, I called the Heathman Hotel and, using the confirmation number from our shared email, requested additional copies of the receipt for tax purposes. The customer service representative was happy to help, and within an hour, I had detailed documentation of not just the recent charges, but a pattern going back 4 months. Couples massages, room service for 2, late checkout fees. A comprehensive record of their affair funded by our joint account. My final call was to Rebecca's father, William, who was contributing $12,000 toward our wedding costs. William was a retired police officer who valued honesty above politeness and had never quite warmed me, but who despised deception more than he disliked his daughter's choice in men. I asked to meet him privately before the rehearsal, claiming I had important information about the wedding finances. We met at a coffee shop near his house at 4 p.m. I spread the evidence across the table like a case file: bank statements, hotel receipts, phone records, timeline documentation. William's face hardened as he absorbed the magnitude of his daughter's deception. When he finished reading, he looked at me with something I'd never seen from him before: respect. "What do you want to do about this?" he asked. "I want her to face the truth publicly with witnesses who matter to her, so she can't manipulate the narrative later." William nodded slowly. "The rehearsal?" "The rehearsal." He agreed to help, but with conditions. The revelation had to be clean, factual, and devastating. No drama, no shouting, no opportunity for Rebecca to paint herself as the victim of an unstable fence. Just truth, presented with the kind of methodical precision that left no room for alternative interpretations. We arrived at the Laurelhurst Community Center at 5:45 p.m. Rebecca was already there, radiant in a white sundress, greeting guests with the warm charm that had made me fall in love with her 6 years earlier. Our families mingled awkwardly in the way families do before weddings, making small talk about travel plans and weather while avoiding topics that might reveal underlying tensions. I watched Rebecca work the room, hugging my mother, complimenting my sister's outfit, discussing flower arrangements with her bridesmaids. She was performance perfection, a woman so convinced of her own ability to manage narratives that she never considered the possibility that someone might have been taking notes. At 6:15, I asked for everyone's attention. "Before we begin the rehearsal, I'd like to share something important about trust and honesty in marriage." Rebecca's smile flickered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly, probably assuming I was about to deliver some heartfelt speech about our journey together. I projected the first image onto the community center's wall-mounted screen, our bank statement with the Heathman Hotel charges highlighted. These are charges from our joint account over the past 4 months. Hotel stays that Rebecca told me were business trips or visits to family. The room's energy shifted immediately. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Rebecca's face drained of color, but she maintained her composure, probably calculating how to explain this away. The second image, detailed hotel receipts showing couples spa packages, room service for 2 late checkouts. These receipts tell a different story. They show a pattern of romantic encounters with someone who isn't me. Rebecca's mother gasped audibly. My own family stared in stunned silence, but I wasn't finished. The third image, phone records showing hundreds of late-night calls to Marcus's number. These are calls between Rebecca and Marcus Henderson, starting 3 months after he transferred to her office and continuing through last night. Rebecca finally found her voice. Daniel, this is a misunderstanding. You're taking things out of context. Am I? I advanced to the final image, a photograph I'd taken through the hotel window the previous night, showing Rebecca and Marcus kissing outside the Heathman at 12:47 a.m. Because this was taken 43 hours ago, while you told me you were in Salem helping your sister with wedding preparations. The silence in that room was deafening. Rebecca's carefully constructed world collapsed in real time, and I watched every stage of her emotional destruction. First shock, then calculation as she searched for an explanation that could salvage the situation. Then panic as she realized no such explanation existed. Finally, the complete emotional annihilation that comes when someone realizes their carefully crafted lies have been systematically demolished. Her father stood up slowly, his face a mask of disgust and disappointment. Rebecca, pack your things. You have until Sunday to get them out of my house. The wedding is canceled, and you can figure out how to pay back the deposits yourself. Rebecca tried to speak, but William held up his hand. I raised you better than this. I taught you about honor and commitment, and you threw it all away for what? An affair with some corporate pretty boy? She looked around the room desperately, seeking allies, finding none. My family stared at her with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Her own friends and family members avoided eye contact. The bridesmaids whispered among themselves, already calculating how quickly they could distance themselves from the scandal. Marcus wasn't there to face the consequences of their choices. He was probably at home, unaware that his secret had just been exposed to 2 families and a room full of witnesses. But Rebecca was there, alone, bearing the full weight of her deception without the support system she'd counted on. Daniel, please, she said, her voice breaking. We can talk about this privately. We can work through this. No, I replied, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. We can't. Trust isn't something you rebuild after betrayal this calculated. Love isn't something you repair after deception this comprehensive. I gathered my evidence, thanked everyone for coming, and walked out of the community center, leaving Rebecca standing in the middle of the room she'd expected to be the site of our wedding rehearsal dinner. Instead, it had become the scene of her complete social and financial ruin. The aftermath unfolded exactly as I predicted. Word of the canceled wedding spread through our social circles within hours. The venue refused to refund the deposit, citing the last-minute cancellation. The caterer, the photographer, the DJ, the florist all demanded payment for services that would never be rendered. Rebecca's portion of these costs, now that her father's financial support had evaporated, amounted to over $18,000. Marcus, when he learned what had happened, immediately requested a transfer back to the Seattle office and blocked Rebecca's number. Faced with the reality of public exposure and professional consequences, he abandoned her as quickly as he pursued her. Rebecca sent me a series of increasingly desperate text messages over the following days. First, she tried anger. You humiliated me in front of everyone. I'll never forgive you for this. Then bargaining, we can go to counseling. We can work through this. I made a mistake, but it doesn't have to end everything. Finally, desperation, I have nowhere to go. I can't afford the apartment alone. Please don't do this to me. I didn't respond to any of them, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because engagement with someone who had demonstrated such calculated deception would only provide them with new opportunities to manipulate the situation. 3 weeks after the canceled wedding, I received a final communication from Rebecca. She was moving back to her hometown in Eastern Oregon, taking a job with a small marketing firm that didn't require references from her previous employer. She'd be living with her aunt until she could afford her own place. The tone of the message was different from her previous attempts at contact, not angry or pleading, but resigned to the consequences of her choices. "I know you'll never forgive me," she wrote. "I don't expect you to. But I want you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life, and I'll spend the rest of it regretting the person I became." Perhaps that was true. Perhaps the woman who had systematically deceived me for months while planning our wedding had finally grasped the magnitude of what she'd destroyed. But remorse after exposure isn't the same as genuine repentance, and consequences after revelation aren't the same as accountability chosen freely. Charlotte, who had been excited about gaining a stepmother, adapted to the new reality with the resilience children often show in the face of adult failures. "I'm sorry Rebecca turned out to be dishonest," she told me a few weeks later, "but I'm glad you found out before the wedding instead of after." Out of the mouths of 12-year-olds comes wisdom that adults spend decades learning. 6 months later, I received notification that our joint accounts had been officially closed and all shared financial obligations resolved. Rebecca had managed to pay her portion of the wedding debts, though I learned through mutual acquaintances that it had required her to liquidate her retirement savings and take on significant credit card debt. The Heathman Hotel, where her deception had finally been exposed, sent me a customer satisfaction survey that I found darkly amusing. How would I rate my experience? Would I recommend their services to others? Had their facilities met my expectations? In a way, they had. The hotel had provided exactly the evidence I needed to uncover the truth about the woman I'd almost married. Their meticulous record-keeping had documented a betrayal so thorough that it left no room for alternative interpretations. Today, nearly 2 years after that midnight revelation, I understand something about betrayal that I couldn't have grasped in the moment of discovery. The pain wasn't just about Rebecca's affair with Marcus. It was about the systematic erosion of reality that had occurred over months, the way she'd made me complicit in my own deception by encouraging me to trust her increasingly elaborate lies. But I also understand something about justice. Real justice isn't revenge. It's truth revealed in a way that prevents further harm. By exposing Rebecca's deception publicly, with witnesses and documentation, I didn't just protect myself from a catastrophic marriage. I protected future partners from falling victim to someone who had demonstrated a remarkable capacity for long-term, calculated deception. The wedding that never happened saved me from a divorce that would have been inevitable. The betrayal that shattered my faith in one person restored my faith in my own instincts and my ability to navigate crisis with clarity and purpose. And if you're wondering whether I ever saw Rebecca again, the answer is yes. Once, about 18 months after the canceled wedding, I was having dinner with Charlotte at a restaurant in downtown Portland when I noticed a familiar figure at a corner table. Rebecca, dining alone, looking older and more tired than I remembered. She saw me too, and for just a moment our eyes met across the room. She didn't approach, didn't wave, didn't try to create a scene or an opportunity for reconciliation. She simply nodded once, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge both the history we'd shared and the finality of how it had ended. I nodded back, then returned my attention to Charlotte, who was telling me about her plans for high school next year. Life had moved forward, as it always does, and the woman who had once seemed essential to my happiness had become just another person in a restaurant, living with the consequences of choices that had seemed wise to her at the time. That, ultimately, is what justice looks like. Not dramatic confrontation or prolonged suffering, but the quiet recognition that actions have consequences, truth eventually surfaces, and people who choose deception ultimately have to live with the world they've created for themselves. The marriage that never happened taught me more about love, trust, and self-respect than the one that might have lasted for years while slowly poisoning both of us with unaddressed betrayal. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is the worst thing you can imagine, revealed just in time to prevent something even worse. And that's the story. If you've stayed with me this long, you understand something about the complexity of human relationships and the importance of trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about people who discovered that the worst moments of their lives led to the best decisions they ever made. Tomorrow, I'm sharing an even more twisted tale of deception, revenge, and the price people pay when they underestimate the intelligence of the people they're trying to fool.